Hello YouTube, I'm Rave Trooper and this is the Stry-strike. This project was a commissioned build. It is a Longstrike shell that has been highly modified to accept Stryfe internals with a modified LightUp magazine and a jolt integrated into the front. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the external modifications that I did first and then move on to the internals, the paint job, and then show you a firing demo. So the first modification externally that I do to any Longstrike I modify is file down these parts on the stock so that it is removable and reattachable. In order to get the Stryfe muzzle piece to attach up at the front as well as the tactical rail, I had to carve up some of the front of the Longstrike shell. I cut off about 1.5 to 3/4 of an inch off of the front so that this could sit back a little bit farther and reduce barrel drag. And then I cut off this bottom area so that the tactical rail would have a place to slide into. I then covered the front with some 1/8 inch ABS sheet plastic, and that's just screwed right into two plastic pieces that are inside of the shell already. I didn't have to do any gluing. It's hardware only, which makes it nice because if the client needed to disassemble the blaster for any reason, everything is still completely disassemblable, if that's a word. Also in the front, the client requested that there be some form of under-barrel integration into the Longstrike barrel extension, something that could be used as a foregrip but also fire darts such as a jolt or a big shock or a triad. So we knocked around a couple of ideas and we found that the jolt actually fits the width of the Longstrike barrel very, very well. So it is just adhered to two plastic sheets, and then those sheets are then screwed into the sides of the Longstrike barrel. So this can actually be removed and other attachments still be used with the stock tactical rail on the Longstrike barrel. But the bond itself, because of where the screws are and just how it's attached, it's very, very secure. You can prime it, pull it really hard, shake it from side to side, and it's not going to come off unless you want it to. The other reason this is nice is because they can be fired separately. So while you're firing over here, you may have an opponent behind you or coming from another direction, so you can hurry and fire off a backup shot and basically dual wield the same blaster. This entire modification project was inspired a while back by Nerfhaven user Germ781's project called the Barristrike, where he integrated barricade flywheel internals into a Longstrike shell. He actually, in order to fit the motors in, he moved the motor cage up and cut the top of the shell to be able to have that sticking out, as well as some of the pusher mechanism in the back was also sticking out. Something that both me and the client wanted from the beginning was something that would still have that same flywheel performance without sacrificing the sleek aesthetic of the Longstrike shell. So we wanted to do as little shell cutting externally as possible. In order to make that happen, we had to move the motors down, and so the motor cage is completely housed in the Longstrike shell here, but that means that the dart has to go through the center of the motors. So the stock magazine well in the Longstrike, which puts the top of the magazine way up here, so I minimized the bottom part here and then glued in a Stryfe magazine well and just kind of moved that up and down so that it would be perfectly centered with the flywheel. So it's feeding darts very, very well, and the magazine release button is still intact from the Stryfe, so we didn't have to create our own, which was very nice. With the removal of all of the stock Longstrike parts, namely the bolt sled and just the entire priming mechanism, the stock Longstrike access door no longer had anything to click into to securely keep it closed. So I epoxied on some rare earth magnets on the outside of the shell here, and then also on the inside of the access door itself in here. So it's very easy to open and close, but it doesn't just fly open unexpectedly. Moving a little farther back, I have integrated a 4x AA battery holder to use Ultrafire or IMR batteries. However, stock AA batteries can also be used if you wanted to run on stock voltage. Don't know why you would, but the option is still there. And this whole thing is still removable, so if the client wanted to upgrade to a lipo pack later on, then that would be very, very easy to do. Next, I cut a hole in the handle so that the rev trigger for the Stryfe would be able to come through and have just enough wiggle room to not get stuck. Finally, I also minimized the trigger. I cut down most of the back of the trigger to enable it to actually be pulled farther, because as some of you may know, the trigger pull in flywheel blasters, you have to pull the trigger much farther than in a Springer where you're simply just disengaging the cap. So there had to be more room in order to use the stock Longstrike trigger and not have to chop up a Stryfe trigger to put in here. I'll go into more details. I'm going to show some internals footage of how I got all of the Stryfe parts to fit into this shell. So I'll go ahead and cut to that internals footage now. Alrighty, so here's just a quick internals shot of the Stry-strike. Starting up here at the front, you can see I cut the inside of this ABS sheet to contour perfectly with the Stryfe's front muzzle piece, and then it has a piece of acrylic sheet glued to here to sort of act as a spacer. So on each side, when the shell goes together, it keeps this from wobbling side to side, which is nice. And then of course we have the Stryfe motors. These are actually glued, sorry, not glued, screwed to the part of the Stryfe shell with the posts and everything that go up, and then these 3 screws go in. That is glued to the shell, so it's practically part of the Longstrike shell, and it was painted with it and everything. So the motor cage is still able to be removed and maintenanced if the motor's ever to get changed out or whatever. And then those are then wired all the way under here, which this still has a big coil of wire. I always put extra wire because you can always cut wire off. It's harder to add it on later. So before I close it up and do the final segment of the video, I'm gonna chop this up so that it's a little cleaner. But that goes to a 9-volt connector, which is then wired to the battery pack on the outside of the blaster. And the reason that I have the connectors here instead of having it just be soldered in is so that you can take, I left plenty of wire here, but if for whatever reason the client wanted to have both shells separated and not attached to each other, they could just undo this connection very easily and be able to do that. Back here I have the part from the Stryfe. This is the entire rev switch assembly, not just the switch itself. It also has the little casing that goes around it, as well as the cover, and then that's just glued on to make it more secure, and then this button still operates just like it would in the Stryfe. Here's my chopped up Longstrike trigger that I talked about earlier. This back here is cut, this up here is cut. When you pull this, there's now more distance, so there used to be a back part of the trigger here, which would then bump into this piece over here. And so since that's no longer there, you can actually pull this all the way. And so I drilled a hole up here, and because, I guess little physics lesson here, we've got a lever here and here's the fulcrum. If we put where it's being pulled closer to the fulcrum, the distance that we have to actually pull that in order to get this piece up here to move farther is less than it would be if we put it down here. The way it is now, you don't have to pull the trigger as far in order to have this pull all the way. So you can just pull it like this and the whole thing goes. So yeah, that's pretty cool. This, of course, is just the spring, which there happened to be a little screw port here in the Longstrike shell, where I think the spring rest used to go right here, and so I just screwed that into there. I had to actually carve out almost everything from the inside of the Longstrike shell with my rotary tool, and so this is just a sort of replacement, just flat, clean slate, I guess, that I put in there. It's just a piece of acrylic sheeting, and then that's glued in, and then I have this piece from the Stryfe, which is just the back part of the shell right underneath where the battery tray is, and then I have 3 screws that are joining this to the acrylic sheet. So this piece can still be removed, which is cool. The entire thing is pretty much completely disassemblable. And then of course right here is the Stryfe's magazine well, which this has about a 1/2 inch of overlap with the Longstrike's magazine well, so there's plenty of gluing space right there. So it's a very, very secure bond. This is just the stock Stryfe magazine release button. I was able to just leave that in that part of the magazine well, which was really nice. That's just an explanation of the internals. I can already tell that this is going to be a pretty long video just because there's so much to go over. This is not your standard Stryfe mod at all. But yeah, so I'll just cut back to me talking about it after the blaster's all closed up. Now moving on to this LightUp magazine. The client wanted something that looked like an energy canister that powered the blaster, so it didn't really look like a Nerf magazine from the outside. So as you can see, it just fits in, you know, just like that, and then lights up. So how I accomplished this was actually probably the simplest part of the entire modification project. I just took a regular 6-round Nerf magazine. This is just the one that comes with Stryfe, and I cut a hole in the top of the container just wide enough to fit the magazine through, and then I secured it in place with a whole bunch of hot glue. I used hot glue like I would use casting resin. I just fill the entire space with it and just sand everything so that it has a very, very firm hold. And so the whole thing is much more of a mechanical bond than it is an adhesive bond. I sanded the outside of the container to help diffuse the light from the LED, which I glued to the bottom of the magazine facing downward to kind of spread the light out evenly, and to serve another function, which I'll get to in a second. And then I have a simple 2-position slide switch here, which activates the LED, which is being powered by one ultrafire battery, which is in a single AA tray. The nice part about this being just a screw top container is that whenever you need to change the battery or recharge it, you can just take this off, take out the battery, charge it, put the lid back on, and you're ready to go. So despite looking really cool in the blaster, the magazine actually has a practical use that we sort of accidentally discovered. Blue light or black light, as many of you might know, illuminates fluorescent colors, specifically orange. Orange is fluorescent orange that is used in pretty much every single Nerf product, glows very bright under blue or black light, and so shining this on the ground while you are playing like at night or in a dark basement or something illuminates the tips of Nerf darts and makes scavenging for darts very, very easy, even in grass outside. I've tested this both inside and outside, and it's proven to be a significant advantage in your Nerf battles because you can just find darts so much easier in the dark just by turning this light on. Alright, so that pretty much sums up the internal modifications that I did. If you have any more questions about any more specific things, just leave a comment on this video and I'll respond to you as soon as I can. So moving on to the paint job, this started off with a gloss black vinyl dye. After that, I added some acrylic enamel purple accents. This is not just like a normal acrylic paint. I don't remember exactly what the name of the color was, but it's an acrylic enamel by Folk Art. I got it at Walmart for like $1. What this paint is actually used for is for painting like ceramic dishes or, you know, or glass. It's dishwasher safe after it cures, so it's basically waterproof. But it's definitely the strongest paint, you know, next to vinyl dye that I've used. It's very, very, very scratch resistant and just awesome. Next, all of the silver parts that you see, excluding the 2 plates on the stock, are all Krylon Short Cuts Chrome dry brushing. These 2 plates on the back, I actually was able to just remove from the stock and paint separately with some Rustoleum silver spray paint that I had left over from another project. So now I'll show you the blaster firing. So hopefully that covers everything. If you're interested in purchasing one of these yourself, This one is not for sale. This was done as a commission specifically for somebody, but it was tons of fun to do. I will have another video up shortly detailing how I do commissions and the best way to contact me and do all of that. So stay tuned for that. If you really can't wait and you want one of these right now, if you're a Nerfhaven user, just send me a message on Nerfhaven, or send me a message through YouTube, or just send me an email. I'll put my email for Nerf stuff in the description box below. Like I said before, I love doing this modification so much, and I would love to do one again, or tons of them, who knows, whatever. So yeah, just contact me if you're interested. That's it for the Stry-strike overview video. If you like this video, give me a thumbs up below, or leave a comment in the comments section to give me feedback for future videos, and be sure to subscribe to see any more modifications or reviews and other Nerf related fun stuff that I do in the future. As always, thanks so much for watching, and happy Nerfing!